In this video, I'm going to show you some of the details of the cedar shingle siding that I installed on our cabin in the woods. Back when I started building our cabin in the woods at age 18, I chose cedar shingles for the siding material because they're timeless, they're beautiful, they're durable, and they're ecologically sound. I never liked the idea of going with something cheaper, faster, and easier, but in my opinion, less timeless and attractive, like, say, vinyl siding. The cedar shingles I chose are considered premium cedar shingles, which means they're made of eastern white cedar, not western red cedar. Eastern white lasts longer, and they're also free of knots and other blemishes, as you can see. That means they're less prone to rot and sun damage over time. Another thing about these shingles that's premium is the butt thickness. These shingles are 3/8 of an inch thick, which means that over time, as the sun and UV rays start to break down the fibers, these shingles will last a lot longer than less premium, thinner shingles, because there's just more wood there to break down. One final feature of the shingles I chose is that these are rebutted and re-squared shingles, which means that extra care is taken at the factory when they're sawn out of the cedar to make sure that the corners are exactly 90 degrees. This makes installation a whole lot easier, makes it a whole lot easier to keep the geometry of the siding installation looking proper without having to spend a whole lot of extra time making up for factory error. As far as the actual installation work of the shingles, I took a few extra steps to make sure these shingles would last as long as possible. One was to install this underlying dimpled plastic membrane below all the shingles. You can see on this side, which isn't finished, that this covers the entire wall beneath every square inch of shingle. This stuff is called Delta Dry. It's rigid, as I mentioned, it's plastic, it's perfectly waterproof. I hold it to the wall with cap staples to shed water, and the idea is that the dimpled profile creates an airspace behind the shingles so that if any moisture does somehow get back there, even though technically it shouldn't, if it does, it'll be able to drain down from behind the shingles and dry instead of being trapped back there and creating rotting the shingles from the underside outwards, which could potentially happen if the shingles were simply flat against a wall surface with no airspace. Another important consideration when it comes to cedar shingle installation on your walls is the amount of overlap of the seams of the shingles from one layer or course to the next. You can see here that I make sure to always have at least 1.5 inches of overlap from the seam of one course of shingles to the seam of the next course, going in both directions. And this is to make sure that water always sheds properly and is not caught in the seams and has a chance to then get behind the shingles. When it comes to working around windows and doors, I always make sure, as you can see here, that the courses of shingles line up visually with the bottom of windows and doors and with the top. You can see here this course lines up with the bottom of this window so that it's visually appealing and it doesn't appear mismatched. And then as I go up the wall to the top of the window, again, the course nearest the top of the window is just slightly above the top of that window, so that once again, visually, the whole wall is harmonious. It's also worth noting that, in my opinion, you're going to save yourself a lot of potential trouble when it comes to water by using custom bent aluminum flashing on the tops of all your windows and doors, which is installed before the shingles. You can see here I've got this white flashing to match the white brick mold of my windows, and it's angled and it overhangs the window slightly so that water just has even more difficulty than usual getting in behind that window. Another feature that takes considerable time and trouble, but in my opinion is completely worth it, is the weaving of the corners of your cedar shingle siding, rather than butting the shingles up against a vertical corner board like most people do. You can see here I've woven the corners of the shingles together, custom cutting them at angles so they sit together tightly, with the seams alternating, first on one side and then the other, to shed water. Not only does this look a whole lot better and classier, in my opinion, than the typical corner board approach, but it also shows considerable skill, and it can be a bit of a conversation piece for people who come over and view your building. As with the woven outer corners of the building, this inner corner where two sections of my cabin meet are also woven. It's actually even trickier to do this, to be honest, than to weave an outer corner, and it involves aluminum flashing that's custom bent. You can see a piece up there where I have yet to install the last pair of shingles to cover it. But again, even though this is very difficult and skill dependent to do, it just looks so much better, in my opinion, as a guy who cares about aesthetics, than slapping some vertical boards up in the corner to make it easier. And to me, I will always choose something that's slower but more beautiful rather than something that's fast but less beautiful. One more feature that takes, again, quite a bit of extra time and trouble, but is once again worth it, in my opinion, is the custom cutting and installation of fancy cedar shingle profiles near the top of your building. You can see at the top of this section of my cabin, I've cut some round fish scale looking shingles and some pointy diamond-like shingles, and I've alternated those patterns towards the top of the gable here. This gives a really striking effect. You can see cedar shingle buildings in different parts of the world that make use of this to add visual interest. And even though it takes, as I said, some extra time, some work with a scroll saw and a chop saw, it's definitely worth it, and it'll really make your building stand out even more than just regular cedar shingles will. So there you have it, some of the features of the cedar shingle siding installation I did here at our cabin in the woods. Again, this is certainly more time-consuming and troublesome, not to mention expensive, than a lot of other cheaper, more modern siding options. But in my opinion, it's totally worth it for the timeless beauty you get. And some people will say cedar shingles won't last as long as, say, vinyl siding, but it's not necessarily true. A good cedar shingle installation on sidewalls will last 50 to 70 years if you take care of it right. So you're going to have a long time to enjoy some real classic, timeless beauty on your building. Thanks very much for watching this video on the cedar shingle siding I installed on our cabin in the woods here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the Cabin in the Woods channel for lots more great content.